Guys, we're in the middle of a pandemic and these are trying times. It's hard on our mental health, our mental state. And this is why I love our sponsor today, BetterHelp. They're the largest online counseling platform worldwide. They change the way people get help with facing life's challenges by providing convenient, discreet, affordable access to licensed therapists. BetterHelp makes professional counseling available anytime, anywhere, through a computer, tablet, or smartphone. It's brilliant. Sign up today. Go to betterhelp.com/solvinghealthcare and get 10% off sign-up fees. Welcome to Solving Healthcare. I'm Kwadwo Kyeremanteng. I'm an ICU and palliative care physician here in Ottawa and the founder of Resource Optimization Network. We are on a mission to transform healthcare in Canada. I'm going to talk with physicians, nurses, administrators, patients and their families because inefficiencies, overwork, and overcrowding affects us all. I believe it's time for a better healthcare system that's more cost-effective, dignified, and just for everyone involved. Quadcast Nation, we got a special episode. We got Dr. Naheed Dosani. I don't say there's about too many people that come on the show, but this man is special. He is somebody, and he's going to continue to be somebody. Founder of the Peach program, providing palliative care to our homeless population, helping create satellite versions of that throughout the country, being an advocate for the BIPOC community, homeless community during these hard times, especially during COVID. He is phenomenal. He is also going to be one of the presenters at End Well, Take 10, which we'll talk about, you'll hear about later on in the show. Like here in Canada, in Ontario, we are lucky to have this guy, and you're going to hear why. His story is tremendous. He's empathetic. He is kind, and he reminds us about why it's important to think about the inequalities in our current healthcare system, why we need that empathy, why we should be providing patient-centered care and trauma-centered care to our homeless population and to others. You're going to feel motivated and moved after this one, guys. So without further delay, Dr. Naheed Dosani. Quadcast Nation, we got a special guest today, okay? We landed, believe it or not, Dr. Naheed Dosani, man, palliative care doc, advocate, just wholeheartedly amazing human being. And it is such a privilege to have you on the show, a monster fan. Thanks for joining us today, my friend.
No, thank you. And it's honestly an honor to be here with you, the man, the one, the only Quadcast. This is amazing. I've been waiting for this for a long time.
Oh my goodness. If I wasn't a brother, I'd be blushing right now. Listen, I want to just get into it. Like, how did you land where you have in terms of the world of palliative care, treating the homeless, treating people on the street? Like, this is not common practice in our palliative care world or even in our world of medicine. So tell us your journey, how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, no, that's a very fair question. So I grew up the child of two refugees who came to Canada in the 1970s from Uganda. There was a humanitarian crisis there and essentially fled war and genocide and persecution with very little, next to nothing. And so I grew up in a home that was really focused on social justice, community well-being. I recognize the social determinants of health, and I always knew I wanted to do that kind of work. And as I went through medicine and eventually in residency, I ended up providing healthcare at a local men's shelter. This was in my first year while I was a resident at the University of Toronto, and provided healthcare for a young man who was dealing with a head and neck cancer, who was homeless, experiencing homelessness, had a chronic mental illness, schizophrenia, and had been on the streets for several years. I built a relationship with him and learned that he was diagnosed maybe like a year before, and due to feelings of insecurity and frustration, he was kind of lost to follow up, as we say in medicine. So he presented in pain crisis to the shelter, and he had actually gone to multiple hospitals and ERs and walk-in clinics trying to seek pain control, but he couldn't get medicine for his pain, probably because of the stigma of homelessness. I built this connection with him, and then I got to the shelter one day, really excited to help him with his pain. I learned that he had died. He had overdosed on a combination of alcohol and street drugs, and this was a really traumatic event for me in my life. I didn't know what palliative care was. I didn't know about the world of healthcare for people experiencing homelessness, but I knew that him, Terry, and I hold him near and dear in my heart in every conversation, had died because he had fallen through the cracks due to structural vulnerabilities around him. And since that time, I know I've really focused on this kind of work, and the rest, I guess, is history.
Holy cow, though! Like, first of all, the story about Terry is just breaks your heart, and I hate to say that, this happens. Like, this is not like once in a blue moon kind of scenario. It's it's falling through the cracks, the stigma, all these things. But what I want to celebrate about you, Naheed, is that you didn't just watch it happen. You actually decided to do something about it. You decided to be that advocate for people that don't have a voice. You know what I mean? Which I think is so unbelievable. So like, what did you do with that? Like, yeah, you hadn't been exposed to palliative care, so you decide to train up in this, and like, what was the rest of the journey there?
First of all, you're very kind. If you really want to know what I did with that, I cried that night. Like, to be honest, I grieved, right? I couldn't believe that in a country like Canada, in a city like Toronto that has a world-class cancer care system, a world-class palliative care, programming, that a person like this could fall through the cracks again and again and again. But once I kind of got over that, I requested some time off from my program director to just think through some things and do some research. And I started to realize that there was this field called palliative care, and as someone who works on the front lines and does excellent work in the community and in hospital providing palliative care for people, that it's this perfect intersection of healthcare and humanity. And I saw it as this opportunity to provide quality of life care. But then I also learned about the healthcare of people experiencing homelessness, that this is one of Canada's sickest subpopulations. They're 28 times more likely to have hepatitis C, 5 times more likely to have heart disease, 4 times more likely to have cancer compared to you and I. And the average life expectancy for people experiencing homelessness is 34 to 47 years old. So this is a very sick population. They're often diagnosed late, and so their palliative care needs are very great. And so, I look to mentors who, you give me a lot of credit. I give a lot of credit to the many mentors who I turn to, researchers, clinicians who are working here and abroad, to think about how we could rationalize a response. Ended up pursuing a palliative medicine residency at the University of Toronto with pretty much the sole purpose of learning how to improve access for people experiencing structural vulnerabilities like poverty and homelessness. And then when I graduated, launched a new program called the PEACH program, Palliative Education and Care for the Homeless, in downtown Toronto, a program at the Inner City Health Associates.
Wow. Like, this is what on a show we call it changing the boogie, man. It's like, you see the problem, you're like, we are going to do something about it. Enough is enough. And it's like you said, people don't realize life expectancy, most average age less than 50, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
The amount of, just in terms of humanity, just the amount of suffering that goes on for our homeless population. And we had Dr. Turnbull on. I don't know if you've ever met Jeff Turnbull.
Absolutely. Someone I admire deeply, an absolute legend.
Isn't he a legend?
Sure. Yeah.
And what I learned from him, and maybe I'm a bit ashamed to say, is like, these, you got to remember, these are real people. This is somebody's mother. This is somebody's daughter. This is a brother, a sibling. Like, these are real people. So it's not just, because I think it's unfortunately easy to dehumanize people when it comes to issues around this. But man, it's just so amazing about how you're able to, once again, change that boogie with that PEACH program. So give us a sense of like what you've had to do to develop it, where it's going, and just because, once again, if this is a model that people outside of Canada or Ontario could emulate, like, we should be celebrating this.
No, thank you so much. And, I have to say, this wasn't just my project. Obviously, I worked with an incredible group of individuals who I still work with to this day who have brought this to life. But really, when we launched the Peach program, the vision was for it to be a mobile, street and shelter-based palliative care program that aims to meet the needs of people experiencing homelessness with serious life-limiting illness, so no person falls through the cracks, so that people can get care in a shelter, people can get care under a bridge, people can get care on the street in the ways that make sense to them. It started with myself and a street nurse, Namrig Ahmed, who's just an inspiration to me. I'm driving out in my Honda Civic, and really it was functioning out of the back of my Honda Civic, and we just drive around the city and provide visits. Yeah. And then 6 years later, in 2020, the Peach program is now a 24/7 model of care that cares for between 100 and 110 clients on caseload at any time. It features an interprofessional team, a health navigator, a nursing coordinator, 4 palliative care physicians. We've had peer workers on our team. We integrate with home and community care and with housing agencies and casework in the community. And so what we're really proud is to be part of a national community. Since that time, we've had cousin programs kind of that have been created across Canada. I'm going to go across the map, okay? Some shout outs.
Celebrate it.
So in Victoria, we have the Port program, with my colleagues, Dr. Kelly Stajahar and Fraser Black, who do incredible work in Victoria, British Columbia. And in Calgary, we have the Camp program, run by Dr. Simon Colgan and colleagues. And then in Edmonton, we have the PICO program that's run by Dr. Kara Bablitz. And there's now programs that are sprouting up in different places. Like, I can't even keep track of all the programs. But what it means is that maybe there's some promise in getting out of our hospitals, getting out of our clinics, meeting people where they're at, to support people in a trauma-informed way to provide palliative care in their homes, which are often thought to be which is like an unorthodox way we think of homes. Like, we've designed a health system that's structurally incongruent to deliver healthcare to people experiencing homelessness, but maybe this model shows promise in palliative care and maybe in other fields too.
Yes. Okay, y'all can't see this, but I've been smiling the whole time because this is just it's so beautiful in so many ways. Like, do you realize you are providing patient-centered care? You are personalizing it. It's what needs are within that patient population. They don't want to be in hospital. They don't want to be in an environment that has been treating them like shit for all these years. You know what I'm saying? Like, this is going to them and giving them the care that they need to be alleviated from their suffering. It's so beautiful. And people, it is being amplified. You heard how many sites have been trying to do this, and this is exactly what we want to be talking about on Solving Healthcare, because it's not all about that your village. It's how we could create these beautiful things throughout other places. And I got to ask too, in terms of the development of these satellites or what have you. Forgive me if that's not the appropriate word, but like, how quickly did this develop? Because, I mean, you're a young man. Like, and so for you to have been part of this so early in your career, like, it sounds like this was a pretty rapid spread.
I could never have imagined that this would have sparked like a movement within the field of palliative care. But yeah, so, I started in practice in 2014, and we started the Peach program. And shortly after, right in 2015, Calgary and their model was starting. And then Victoria started, and then Edmonton, and it's only been like, a good 5-6 years, and we've seen models develop across Canada. And now we're starting to engage the conversation internationally as well. We've seen some programs in Seattle, Brisbane, Australia, and even a team in London, the United Kingdom. So I think what we're seeing is an evolution. And I know you talk a lot about solving healthcare. And sometimes when we train the next generation of trainees, we teach them, well, this is healthcare, this is how it is, and this is how it's going to be. And what I hope these conversations bring to the forefront for anybody listening, whether you're a trainee or not, is the idea that this is not how healthcare has to be. We can dismantle and deconstruct structures of power within healthcare, and we can reiterate, we can rearrange that power to bring equity to the forefront. And in my little corner of the world, that's what we did. But at a macro level, I wonder if that's a lesson that makes sense for your listeners today too.
what the dropping bombs, man, my friend, dropping bombs. I was getting chills just thinking about, because I was actually going to ask you before even talking about like how to create change within our current infrastructures. What is it about you though? You know what I mean? Because there's not many, like, maybe this is hard to generalize, but I find in medicine innovation, thinking outside the box, trying to create change is up. You have a lot of resistance throughout. Like there's usually obstacles to be able to achieve your goals. So I guess my question is, what is it about you that is allowing you to push, or what did you do to overcome some of these barriers? Like what's making you Naheed?
That's wow, that's a very deep question. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
It's great. It's awesome.
I feel like it's rare these days, man.
And I want to say that none of the actions that I take as a team happens in isolation. That the team that I work with is everything. When I think about what we've done, I put that to the forefront. I think sometimes we get caught in these iterations of evaluation and study. And, they say in Ontario, we're the capital of pilot programs because we do a pilot, then we study the pilot, then we study the study of the pilot. And I am a fan of evidence, and I live in an evidence-based medicine and healthcare world, but we need to balance that with the reality. And so when we launched the Peach program, for example, we did a 1-year pilot. We saw some good results. 80% of people, were reconnected to family or friends. 64% never went to the hospital ER. 83% died where they wanted to. And we were like, that's good enough. It's making a difference. We don't need to study this. Like, let's just push it. And we did. And I think sometimes we get caught up in that. Just switching gears, I think sometimes in the spirit, the spirit of healthcare is always meant to be about the patient. But as well as I do, in our teams, our institutions, we get distracted. We get caught up with funding models. We get caught up with staffing. We get caught up with branding. We get caught up with, there's a lot of distractions. We need to bring back to person-centered care. And within our work for people experiencing homelessness, that boils down to trauma-informed care, about learning how to pronounce someone's name, about what their preferred pronoun is, about bending down to their level to speak at eye level so you can connect with them, going outside of hospitals and clinics to in communities that people typically wouldn't provide healthcare, for example, and being, thinking about policies and procedures that recognize the traumas that people have experienced. Even one night on the streets can be a traumatic experience, and responding in that way. And then finally, I think one way is we've really invested in supporting each other. There is a pandemic happening out there, and I know we all know about that one, but the COVID one, but there's another pandemic happening, and it's grief, and it's moral injury, and it's compassion fatigue among frontline workers working in healthcare, of course, but also in the social service sector, particularly supporting people experiencing homelessness as well. And what we've done is had some interventions to really support people through their grief. We hold these grief circles when one of our clients dies, so that social workers, social care workers, health workers can come together. We light a flame, we grieve, we laugh, we joke, we remember the person we cared for, we put that flame out so that we can go out and do it again. So I think really thinking about, moving forward with some evidence and not overstudying it. I think trauma-informed care is a second concept, and probably the third is supporting each other and providing some wellness amidst this pandemic of grief.
Y'all cats realize how much gold was just dropped there, man? I had to write this down. Listen, like the aiming for good, not better approach, like not aiming for perfection, not getting bogged down by bureaucracy, like you said, like I'm all about evidence-based practice, but we have to be pragmatic at times. You know what
Absolutely.
I mean? Like you can't wait for the, does it have to be an RCT with the N of 30,000 patients to be able to determine whether something's effective or not? Like when you tell me you're reducing Peach program, reducing emerge visits, when you're reducing hospitalizations, reducing healthcare spending, essentially, bam, okay, let's dance. You know what I'm saying? And then you talk about like having like that trauma-centered care?
Trauma-informed care,
and trauma-informed care. Realize, like, often we're not putting ourselves in our patient's shoes. Like, think about that for a second. Think about living, like, get outside of your condo, your apartment, your office, and you're living on the street right now. Today we're November 26th. Imagine being outside, hustling, trying to figure out where you're going to sleep, what you're going to eat. Like, that shit's real. And like, so to have that empathy and to be at that level is our duty. I'll put it that way.
Absolutely.
It's our duty. And then I gotta give some love to the circle of grief. I think collectively in medicine, we don't take enough time to grief. Like, I think we all deal with it in different ways. And sometimes in general, we don't deal with it enough, but to make it an active practice. I know in our palliative care team, what we do it on Wednesdays, we talk about the patients that have we've lost and what, tell their story and maybe talk about how they connected with us. And it's healing. I think it's such an important part of what we do, but knowing that, once again, you guys, ahead of the game, like that being an active part of your practice and it's wonderful. It's just wonderful to hear.
Thank you. And it's also likewise very wonderful to hear that you're doing that, because I suspect, the times that you spend for reflection with your team to remember those who have passed on is in a way a way to support healing and prevents that moral injury and compassion fatigue. I don't like saying burnout. It's moral injury and compassion fatigue. That's what we're really talking about. And it probably serves you and your team really well to be able to do that. I just don't understand if we're all about health, right? Because it's healthcare. Why don't we do this more? Why isn't this more prominent and consistent, right? I don't know. It's kind of wild that it's not.
Yeah, it's true. And I think of my ICU colleagues, like we see death and dying on the daily, and sometimes we debrief on some of the more traumatic cases or the ones that hit closer to home. But, there is a lot of moral injury within our colleagues. And so you got me thinking, like, whether we need to be more active in terms of that. Cause our research program, we're doing some active projects on how to reduce moral injury and we called it burnout within our group. But now you got me thinking about just having that aspect of things. Because I think a lot of people also do it at a personal level, like, you know what I mean? Like I can speak for myself personally. Like I usually try and reflect on these things, maybe on the drive home or so at some point. Like I always feel like it's got to come out at some point. But yeah, like to be more proactive about it and not wait for it to, affect you dramatically in a time where you can't afford it, I think is intelligent. We need to talk about the pandemic. You brought it up a little bit because shit is crazy. I mean, the way it's impacting, I don't even know where to start, buddy. How it's illustrated some of our gaps in our healthcare system, how it's affected the most vulnerable, our vulnerable populations the hardest. Maybe I'll leave the question broad. Like, what are lessons that we have learned? What are some of the messages that you want to amplify and say to the world from what we've seen? What is it? 8 months into this, 9 months into this craziness.
Yeah, so I think you really bring up some good points, and you can't talk about this pandemic if you're not talking about inequities, right? And who is bearing the brunt and the disproportionate impact of this pandemic. And I always say that the pandemic hasn't just highlighted the inequities in our communities, it's also perpetuated them on multiple levels. And so, I'll speak from one level, working as a physician who provides healthcare to people experiencing homelessness, but then later being brought on as the medical director for the region of Peel's COVID-19 homeless response here in Ontario. I've been working on the front lines and then in some leadership positions to be able to provide responses to this pandemic. And it's really brought to forefront the homelessness crisis in this country. Here in Toronto, where they're saying there's 10,000 people living on the streets every single night. across Canada, 300,000 unique individuals are experiencing homelessness. We think that's an undercount. We know that there's been, the establishment of these COVID programs in jurisdictions across Canada, like the one in Region of Peel, to support people experiencing homelessness who are under investigation for COVID or who have gotten COVID. And while that's been helpful, there's this whole proportion of people who just don't trust institutions like healthcare. So they've not come into programs like this, or they've not gone into the hotel and motel programs that have been developed. And so they're in encampments, and the encampments are growing, and you can see them lining the streets of cities across Canada right now. It's hard to ignore. You can see it with your own eyes. But what I have learned is that for years they told us there's no funding for housing. And for years,
God,
we were
right?
told that levels of government can't work together. And then COVID came, and all of a sudden, like, I'm seeing, we can get hotels and we can get motels, and obviously I'm for all that. But what I'm saying is, has COVID-19 taught us that it can be a cure to homelessness? We can actually cure this thing, and we can now work together. And maybe that's the silver lining of it. That's one front. The other is on the front around the realities of racism and the impacts of systemic racism in our communities. We know about the events that happened with George Floyd earlier on in the pandemic, and what that led to across the world, really, especially here in Canada. And it's important to say, if people aren't aware, that COVID-19 disproportionately impacts low-income racialized people. In a city like Toronto, first wave, 83% of people who were impacted were BIPOC, Black and Indigenous, and people of color. In cities like Hamilton, 50% of people who were impacted were BIPOC, while representing only 20% of the population. Just as examples. And so, this speaks to systemic issues. Sometimes the government response has been to blame these communities. Sometimes the stigmatized response has been to blame, racialized communities for this. But you cannot blame racialized communities, because these have been our essential workers. These are the people working the front lines, factories, warehouses, production plants, taxi drivers, your Uber drivers, grocery stores, so PSWs, people working in long-term care. And this has been our response. Our response should be paid sick leave. Our response should be government support. And we've recently seen some support for small businesses from the government, but we need to see more. And so we've seen that impact, and I hope this changes the dynamic a little bit about how we move forward on these conversations. The other reflection is just around communication. And it blew my mind, like halfway through this pandemic, that the ways that most governments across Canada were communicating public health knowledge was like these press conferences in the middle of the day at 1 p.m. when everyone else is work. And like, who watches these press conferences? I don't know. Do you?
I've never once seen this bad boy. Oh my God.
Yeah, so like I started to get online and be like, what are we doing? Like, why is this the only medium? And then I think what you expect is traditional media picks that up and translates the information. Like, I'm under 40, and most of my friends do not watch TV, do not watch traditional news. They're on Instagram, they're on TikTok, and actually that's where they're getting their information about COVID. No wonder they don't know about, like, we should be staying home, as they didn't know about the social bubbles when that was a thing. Like they're very worried about vaccination. They're getting all this misinformation. How are we not out there with the real information? I spent a lot of time trying to convince the government and different levels of decision makers to be using these platforms more effectively, like Instagram and TikTok. And I've been dropping some of these videos to show examples of how we could do it. Anyways, those are some thoughts.
Wow. Yes, the first thing is we talked to Mark Tyndall about, and he's in Vancouver, about exactly what you said about, we can't find housing for our homeless, and all the bureaucracy and red tape that came up. COVID hit, boom. They're able to provide some shelter and some housing. I hope there is some level of sustainability there, that people are going to see the benefits and the need, and post-pandemic, that these kind of approaches will stay. And the other thing that you mentioned that really stuck with me is how much, yes, COVID has hit racialized and poor communities. Like, I just don't know why we're not, like, is our approaches Are we approaching this problem? Are we having any strategy to address that? This is what drives me nuts. Like, I'm in Ottawa. There's two ice. This is, once again, guys, it's November 26th. According to our public health site, we got like 2 ICU COVID patients in the city. You know what I mean? And at the time they were talking about closing gyms and stuff like that. And locally, this is not where the problem is. The problem is long-term care, high rises, low socioeconomic scenarios, BIPOC community. But what are we doing about it? Well, how are we addressing it? Are we going to the community? Are we talking to their leaders and saying, here's are the problems? Do you guys fully understand what we're trying to do? Bubbles, distancing, limiting social interactions. Like, is that being communicated? And like talking, like, once again, even when it comes to like what you're talking about when you're palliative care setting, going to the people and talking to them and trying to address their needs. And that communication piece, it is kind of funny. 1:00 on whatever it is, 1:00 during the day, like, motherfucker, we're hustling. I ain't going on. I don't even know where you would find it. It's like on general news, or like, I don't even know where you see these press conferences. But yeah, tailoring the communication to the people, especially the people that are being where it's being hit the hardest. It's such great points. And do you feel like, what do you think will change? What do you think will stick? Like, do you have hope in all this?
I always say that if we don't have hope, like, what's the point of all this? You got to have hope, right? Like, that has to be the guiding light through all this. But the path to that hope, I always say it has, like we talked about earlier in the conversation, you have to bring it back to the person we're caring for. And I think through a path through equity, we can, that if that's our guiding light and our compass, we will find our way to hope. And so what we've seen too often in this pandemic is a simplified one size fits all approach to almost anything and everything, whether it be around the way we collect data. They weren't collecting race-based data at the beginning. Our government officials were actually saying we shouldn't collect race-based data, and then we did. Look what happened, right? Mm-hmm. To our communications, right? We were, press conferences when, actually people under 40 are, case counts are going up for people under 40, and they're not getting the messaging. To low-income racialized communities where they previously were not, releasing hotspot data here in Ontario. They weren't releasing funding for local pop-up testing. And then finally that did change over time. But if we had just kind of had that approach at the beginning, things might have been different. And while I'm not sitting at those at those tables, and being at those tables must be challenging, I wonder sometimes about the voices that are at those tables. Do we have BIPOC representation? Do we have people from all walks of life at those tables? And I don't get that sense.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, because I mean, I know, like, if I'm at that table, my voice is loud. You know what I mean? When you see what's going on. So, like, I mean, as you said, we're not there, but I highly doubt that there's going to be representation up there, because it shows. It really shows.
Yeah. The proof is kind of in the pudding when it comes out, for sure.
Oh my God. But I do think the fact that things have changed, you know what I'm saying, Naheed? Like the fact that they're, they did start to do hotspot testing. They did start to, measure or record race. Voices were heard, and things did change. It probably, slower than we would like, but it still is change. So, there is hope.
But voices are so important. Like, so for example, when Ontario switched to online booking for COVID testing, because the lines were so long, one of the things that we were shocked at is, like, there seemed to have not been any thought about, the plight of people who don't have internet or access to phones, or, for example, the population I serve, people experiencing homelessness. And so we had to speak out. And then we learned later that, they heard us speaking out. So then they made accommodations at these sites for walk-ins. And it's just, if you just take an equity informed approach from the very beginning, your outcome, and you listen to the population, the outcomes may be better. It's probably an important principle in, like, improving and solving healthcare, right?
Yeah, this is, this is one thing for sure. Equity has come up as a major theme, and we're going to continue to advocate for it, my friend, because it's
awesome.
A lot of these guys can't, their voices aren't being heard.
For sure, for sure.
We need to talk about Take 10, my friend.
Yeah.
Listen, I'm going to get you to explain what Take 10 is, but I just want to say you are in some pretty ballin' company at this virtual conference. I got to tell you, and we were talking beforehand that it's too bad this thing is virtual now, because like meeting some of these co-presenters would be unbelievable. But yeah, tell us a little bit about Take 10.
Yeah, so Take 10 is a project, is a product of the NWELL project. So you can head over to nwellproject.org, and it's a American organization started by my colleague, Dr. Shoshana Ungerleider, who is an incredible human being and the founder of NWELL, but also one of the executive producers for the Netflix documentary called Extremists. I don't know.
Oh, yes, the ICU one.
Yeah, that's right. So Dr. Ungerleider actually was the executive producer for that. And she's based out of California. And NWELL runs an event each year that really brings palliative care, death, dying, serious illness conversations to the forefront for previously for an American audience. And they've grown over the years. And this year, you're right, I was supposed to fly to LA for this event and speak live, but due to the pandemic, it's now of a virtual format, which I feel very lucky to be a part of anyway. And I'm just like pinching myself thinking about the kind of people that are at this event. I feel really lucky to be in the midst of some of these people. And I think it's free. I think people will really like it. The videos are archived. It is live on December 10th. And nwellproject.org is the website. And I encourage people to really, check it out. I think it's going to be really moving.
Awesome. Yeah, this is going to be pretty special. And like Atul Gawande is going to be that bad boy. I saw like Blair Underwood, whom like my sister and my mom had mad crushes on. Well, LA Law,
totally. Taraji.
Yes.
Taraji Henson. Oh,
yes.
Yeah. Andy Cohen. The list goes on. It's kind of crazy.
It's
Thank
crazy.
You so much.
That's how you know you've made it, my friend. We always try and end on a high note. Can you think of a time where yourself or your team has made a real impact on a patient or family that like you always at times have those stories or those moments where you reflect back on and you tell yourself, I was glad I was part of this. Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of, a case very recently that we've been working on for a gentleman who was on the streets. He had lived for several years on the streets, and he had metastatic lung cancer. He was admitted to hospital, discharged with a diagnosis, and all he wanted was housing, and that was what his dream was. And while he was experiencing a life-limiting illness and would likely die before he would get housing, he still wanted to get housing. And so while we rallied around him to provide medical care, manage his pain and symptoms, it wasn't the point. The point was to assist him through the process, make a plea, make a case. And, housing waits are very long. But in this case, because of his short prognosis, we were able to advocate with local organizations and get him a place of his own. And when he got that place with furniture, his eyes just lit up. It was everything to him. And he spent a very short amount of time in that apartment. But that length of time is not the point. The point was achieving, his goal through a quality of life mechanism. As we think about healthcare, too often, and our outcomes are focused around, healthcare costs and, metrics that are not person-centered, for example. And especially in the work that we do, a lot of the metrics and the outcomes are really around the social determinants of health, which are defined by the structural determinants of health. And so we measured success in that case because he may have died very soon, and but we were able to address his biggest, goal in life, which was to get housing, and he died in housing. And so that was really important. And that's like a small snippet of the kind of case that we deal with from time to time, and a reminder that we need to move from an equality-based healthcare system where people get the same things to be happy and healthy to an equity-based system where people get what they need to be happy and healthy. And then finally to a justice-based health system where people get to make their own decisions about what they need and want to be healthy and are empowered and resourced to do so. Right. And so that's that transition we need to make. And I hope this conversation inspires that kind of thinking for the listeners today.
My God, there's very few times when I finish a podcast and I leave it feeling inspired, wanting to do more, wanting to create that more amazing healthcare system that we all thought we were getting into. But I want to thank you, Naheed. This has been so incredible, so moving, so inspiring, and we need to celebrate you, my friend. How do people get a hold of you or track you down? Where do we find you, my friend?
Well, before we do that, I want to thank you. I think that you likewise are very inspiring and have shown great courage in having conversations that we've been needing to have in healthcare for a really long time. And thanks for bringing these issues and topics, and your guests as well, thanking them to bring these issues to the forefront. It's only by having this discourse will we actually be able to achieve some of the things we might be able to achieve, some of the things we talked about today. So thank you so much. In terms of me, you can reach me on Twitter and Instagram at Naheed. That's NAHEEDD. And for those who have taken the dive on TikTok, you can connect with me at dr.naheed. That's dr.naheed, Naheedd. Thank you so much. Such an honor and privilege today.
Buddy, we are doing this again. This was awesome. Thank you so much.
Much love, respect.
Kwadcast Nation, are you feeling inspired? I'm telling you, I'm feeling mad inspired after that. Naheed representing. This is exactly what Solvent Healthcare is all about. Yo, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube at Kwadcast. Leave any comments at kwadcast99@gmail.com. Leave a 5-star rating or review anywhere you listen to our show. It makes a difference. It improves our visibility. We're trying to represent. We're trying to change that boogie. Thanks so much for the support, guys, and we're going to connect again real soon. Peace.